On March 24th, 2021, an anonymous user posted something on 4chan that would leave readers questioning the boundaries between dreams, reality, and divine encounters. He started with some background. He was a 23-year-old Southerner, depressed, existentially miserable, often suicidal, but still kicking. Raised Christian, but totally atheist. The material universe was all there was, as far as he was concerned. He was also a well-practiced lucid dreamer, really good at it, could fly, teleport, summon people and objects, all kinds of stuff in his dreams. He woke up in bed and checked his phone. The time was 1:20. He checked it again. It was now 3:50. He realized he was dreaming. He got out of bed and walked to his bookshelf to observe. The titles went all wonky, like a broken digital clock, glitching out. Normal for dreams. Your subconscious is terrible at two things, among others: linear time and written text. Later, he thought about the number of times he'd started a dream in the same place his actual physical body was sleeping. He could count it on one hand. He looked out the window. The sky was the same burnt, hellish orange color his lucid sky always had. Like sunset, but it was false light. Settled into his dream body, he began walking to his bedroom door, using it as a loading screen. Anywhere he wanted to go was on the other side of that door. He wanted to go to his dream hotel, a place that had lots of doors and characters. Hotel lobby clearly in mind. He was going there. He opened the door. It was his living room. Everything was oddly normal, looked like real life. Mild confusion. He must not have concentrated right, even though he had it pretty tight. He walked through the house to the front door, still thinking hotel, extra double focused now. He opened the door. It was his neighborhood. He figured he couldn't teleport for some reason. He'd fly and see what his subconscious would make of it. He couldn't fly now either. He could levitate, maybe 6 inches off the ground. Every time he started moving, he stumbled to the ground when he got moving faster than a walk. And it was deserted. His dreams always had characters. There was no one. The neighborhood looked real as he float tripped down to the end of the street. He got to the end of the street, mildly frustrated. It was a T intersection. He looked left, looked right. There was a person, blurry, like they were farther away than they were, out of place with the surroundings. Nothing else to do. He headed towards them. He got closer, stumbled a final time, couldn't even float. The person was coming into clear view. It was a woman, blonde, about his height, black shirt, blue skirt, still looked distorted, couldn't make out features beyond color. He walked closer. The sky turned blue. That was a first. Either he was asleep and not noting the strangeness of the sky, or he was lucid and it was burnt hell orange. She looked exactly like him, but female. Blonde hair, blue eyes. His height, black t-shirt had a star on it, like a pentagram, but too many points, etched in purple. Blue jean skirt. Her eyes were sharp, made him want to wince looking into them. Something was off looking at her, like he was walking up to a sheer mountainside, not a person. She was blurry and too angular at the same time, despite looking physically like a human. He was frustrated by this point, powerless, wondering what his brain was doing. What's this then? You called. Here I am. New accent. Never heard that. Couldn't describe it. Stress on the wrong syllable, but clear and commanding. He felt an invasion in his head as she said this. Felt like she just scanned his brain like a dictionary and pulled the words she wanted. He could make dream characters say what he wanted. They said what he expected them to say. This wasn't that. I didn't call anyone. What do you mean? She repeated herself. No invasion. He told her he didn't summon anything. He was trying to go somewhere. I'm not from around here. New words. Same pulling feeling. What's that supposed to mean? I'm not from around here. He got what she was saying. Oh, you're not from my head. You are from my head. You're me. And you know damn well we don't believe in any of that bullshit. In hindsight, he really should have automatically woken up. Talking to the dream about the fact it's a dream makes it unstable usually. But they were just talking. She kept saying she wasn't from around here. She was from somewhere else. Prove it then. Prove you're not me. I know you can't. You aren't ready. He started talking trash, pulled straight from TV tropes. This just a form I'm comfortable with, huh? Let me guess. I'd go mad from the revelation? You're actually a humanoid abomination, and your very existence is things man was not meant to know? Right? She smirked. You have it exactly. He was feeling strange despite blustering. She was putting off an aura of pure threat, like an animal that could kill you by accident if it moves carelessly. She was also completely irresistible, despite putting off the strongest uncanny valley he'd ever seen. He kept demanding that she prove it, simultaneously trying his normal tricks. Try making her face change, make her disappear, make her burst into flames, make her say what he wanted. That won't work. I'm not from around here. He told her he didn't believe her. that if his subconscious had a message, it needed to just say it. What's your judgment take on humanity? This threw him way off. His dream characters didn't talk about abstracts at all. Humanity, that was a weighted, interconnected subject. He told her what he thought. His opinions were mixed. She smirked again. No humor in it. Sharp, alluring, pitiless. What do you think of causality? He told her he could get a lot more done without it, but that it made sense why it was a law. She giggled. She kept changing the topic and asking questions. Asked about his thoughts on history, who he'd loved, and what happened with them. His ideal society, how he felt about death, destruction, and war. He'd never had a dream conversation like this. She was saying less than him, but meaning more. She was entrancing, and he couldn't help but enjoy it, like maybe she was something else. Over his dead body, would he admit that? He demanded proof, a final time. She said she needed something from me first. Shoot, I know you're not real. What could you want? She searched his language again, worse than before, like she went through everything. Antichrist. That's not what it is, of course, but it's the closest word you have. He realized what she was asking, and was now convinced this was just an overly elaborate wet dream scenario. He made it clear she was going to prove it if he gave her what she was asking. Affirmative. But we have to do it in a specific place. They moved. The scene shifted. What he tried to do at the start of the dream, she did effortlessly. Vague, sinking feeling that this wasn't his dream to start with. They were in the backyard of his childhood home. His first nightmare was in that dreamscape. 2 years old, whole family eaten by alligators at his birthday party, while a clown saved him from them. He saw it all. His own subconscious had never taken him back there. Never. He knew she was telling the truth. What happened next, he described as like the concept of the act itself. It was awesome, but he was getting feedback off of her. He finished. He knew he finished. Felt it clearly. That was important for later. He got up. She sat up, smiling for real for the first time. Now see me, and see what you've guaranteed for them. The veil dropped. Everything was gone in an instant. What he felt behind her, it wasn't a feeling. It was here, and it was her, without the glamour. He was engulfed by it in literally no time. Felt like his brainstem was cut, like he must fall to his knees. He had no knees to fall to, or ground to put them on. There was just it. It was big. Bigger than the night sky you look up at, and bigger than any concept of big you have. Bigger than the universe, easily. And that's bigger than we can really grasp already. Big in dimensions that don't exist. Agony seeing it. It was loud in every sense of the word. Every sense he had, and a lot he never had before. This thing was broadcasting its being. Not making the noise, just was the noise. It felt old, felt like time was nothing to it. For that moment, he was it, or rather, an infinitely minuscule thought within its mind. Time wasn't a thing for it. Time was just for us. It felt different. There was nothing human or material in its pattern. It was indescribable, utterly. Not good or evil, not by our definition. Would an ant be able to judge the boot that crushes it? It was like staring into an eternal, infinitely scaled nuclear explosion and just taking it to the face, forever. It told him in pure meaning, not a language. You're here until I let you go. And he witnessed. He didn't know how long he was there. Eternity is just a moment. It let him go. He rocketed up in his bed, gasping for air like a newborn baby, his pulse racing at an easy 130 p.m., in cold sweat, and no evidence of what had happened physically. Fucking eldritch abomination was the first words out of his mouth. Like that's what Lovecraft meant. He tried to repress the dream for 6 months, until something happened that forced him to look at it and accept that yeah, he'd met something. And then he started digging, and found who he met. As soon as he read the first thing about her, he knew who she was. The mythology matched her actual attitude. She connected everything. She'd been with humanity since prehistory. She'd been in the background of Western civilization's development at every crucial junction. Her symbolism matched Jesus's. Holy Spirit, Mother. The Egyptians called her Isis. Isis learned the true name of God via trickery. Earlier, Ishtar made civilization her domain, after winning the mess from Enki. She failed at conquering the underworld, but made it out with the water of life after 3 days of death. What did Christ do? He conquered hell and freed the righteous that died before him. Like mother, like son. Her thing was literally running up on other gods and stealing their responsibility and enforcing divine justice. Maybe the shift from polytheism to stated monotheism wasn't just cultural development. Maybe there really was a war going on. Maybe there still is. He knew she was real, and he knew she asked him his judgment. And he found 3 others asked the same question by the same thing. One dude was literally crazy homeless. All answered the same as him. The comment section filled with a mixture of awe, concern, and theological debate. Some people believed every word, saying they'd felt similar presences or had encounters that changed their entire worldview. Others thought he'd experienced a psychotic break or severe sleep paralysis combined with religious trauma. Many were disturbed by the implications that something ancient and powerful was judging humanity and finding it wanting. Religious commenters argued about which entity he'd actually encountered. Some said it was a demon pretending to be divine, using the form of ancient goddesses to deceive him. On October 25th, 2014, an anonymous user posted something on 4chan that would make readers afraid of rural mountain properties at night. He started by setting the scene. His grandma's property was set about 2 miles down the road from her house, way out in the country. That's where you entered the first gate, by the road to start up the extremely narrow dirt road up the mountain. It wound up the side until you got to the top, about a 15-minute drive. At the top it was all fenced in, a big area with a field at the very bottom. It was on top of a mountain, so it sloped up. That field was fenced in with a wooden fence. Trees outlined the field at the bottom, and they were very thick and covered in brush. On the field's far right side, there was a corral and very old barn. Up from the field was kind of an open logged area where the road came through. A block foundation where his grandpa had begun to build another cabin, and a really crappy cabin made of plywood or something. It was all one room. It had one window in the very front, facing away from the field, looking toward the top of the mountain, where there was thin forest. The mountain peaked here, and the fence went on down the hill until it stopped and became thick brush forest, like the bottom of the field on the other side. It was an extremely large, fenced-in area, and the thin forest stretched on forever. You couldn't see one side of the fence from the other in any direction. He was just guessing, but he'd say 50 acres or more of mountaintop. They kept it to keep their cows in the pasture field area, which was large but surrounded by trees and a wooden fence. It was surrounded by trees in the form of a G, and the little circle inside the G was sort of a sinkhole that you couldn't see from the main dirt road. His grandpa had died of lung cancer. His grandma, as hardworking as she was really small and only able to tend her yard and garden, so someone had to feed the cows and check on them. He usually drove down after work, checked on her, then drove up there, grabbed some feed from the barn, and fed the cows. One night he got off work a little late, and it was getting dark, so he drove straight up to the mountain. When he got to the top to get out and open the gate into the area, he heard a cow mooing really loud. He didn't think anything of it, since they usually did this, but this was really loud and sounded off. When he pulled up to the pasture, the cows were nowhere to be seen, which was weird because they usually came running when they heard him coming. He put the feed in the trough and hollered for them, but they didn't come. He figured they were just in the non-visible area of the field, the G-shaped part, but he had to go check. He went to his truck and grabbed a flashlight since it was getting dark and it was a large field. As he walked down to where he thought they were, he kept hearing that loud moo that sounded weird coming from different directions, but it didn't deter his path since he was sure they were in that part of the field. He rounded the corner, and down in the sinkhole, they were all standing there huddled up quietly. As he walked up to them, he tried to shoo them to the barn, but they wouldn't budge. That's when he heard another moo from the woods at the top of the sinkhole. He thought one had gotten out of the fence and was in distress. He wasn't really freaked out at this point, so he decided to investigate and retrieve the cow. He didn't do a head count because he didn't really know how many they had. So he walked up the hill of the sinkhole where he thought the moo came from, but around the time he got to the top, he heard it again coming from another side of the field. He walked over, hopped the fence, and shined his light through the dense woods. He was shaky from being in the woods during the dark, but not really scared. He walked back a bit in the woods and saw it, the cow standing in a little clearing facing away from him. Black and white, looked like a cow, but it was sitting down like a dog and looked sickly. He thought it might have hurt its back legs or something, so he walked up to it. Then he noticed something as he got closer. Its hooves weren't hooves. It had hands on its front legs, long, thin fingers with fleshy, brittle-looking fingernails. Not being able to explain what he'd saw, he called out to it in hopes it was just the dark messing with him. "Suey Kafir, come eat." At that point, about 20 yards from him in the clearing, the thing stood up on 2 legs and turned around. Its skin was colored like a black and white cow, but its body was nothing like it. It was tall and thin, with a strange flat face, large mouth, and sunken in dark eyes. He ran out of the woods as fast as he could, tripping and stumbling over everything, his heart pumping so hard he couldn't hear anything else. When he got to the fence, he leaped straight over it and sprinted through the field to his truck. He got in, locked the doors, started the truck, and grabbed his .380 compact from the glove box. He backed his truck down most of the thin dirt road until he got to the gate. He turned around on a steep hill, almost flipping his truck, now facing the gate. He looked around his truck with the flashlight. He hurried and got out to unlatch the gate and swing it wide open. On the short way back to my truck, just inside the forest beside him, he heard, "Su-e Kaffir come eat." He got in his truck and scrambled down the mountain without closing the gate. Then, after what seemed like forever, he arrived 2 miles away at his grandma's house. He told her everything, and she just sat there calmly and said, "Sounds like a trickster." He took this as her saying it was someone playing a joke on him and angrily left. He learned later that local Indians called shapeshifters and skinwalkers tricksters. His grandma sold the cows, then the land, and he never returned. He tried to pretend it didn't happen. He'd seen a ghost before and had a friend with him who also saw it, but he didn't know what to make of that thing. The comment section filled with a mixture of terror and fascination. Some people immediately identified it as a skinwalker or wendigo, creatures from Native American folklore known for mimicry and taking the shapes of animals. Others pointed out that his grandma's calm reaction suggested she knew exactly what it was, that she'd probably heard stories about things on that mountain her whole life. The fact that she sold everything shortly after confirmed she took it seriously, even if she tried to downplay it to him. Many commenters were disturbed by the detail about the hands instead of hooves, and the way it sat like a dog. That suggested something that was trying to be a cow, but didn't quite understand how cows worked, like it was wearing a cow costume, but couldn't commit to the role. The fact that it stood up on 2 legs and had a flat face with sunken eyes meant it wasn't even trying to hide what it was once it had been discovered. The mimicry was what got to most people. The thing had been calling out in cow sounds to lure him deeper into the woods, positioning itself in clearings to draw him in. And then when he'd called out to it using his normal phrase for the cows, it had repeated his exact words back to him, in what was presumably his own voice. That level of intelligent, predatory behavior suggested something far more dangerous than a simple animal. One commenter shared a photo the poster had included, showing a fallen tree blocking the road to his grandma's house the next day. The fact that this massive tree had fallen right after his encounter, forcing him to take an hour detour, struck many as too coincidental. Either the thing had followed him and was marking territory, or something didn't want him going back up that mountain. His grandma selling the cows and the entire property shortly after suggested she'd made her choice. Whatever was up on that mountain, it could have it. The poster ended by saying he tried to pretend it didn't happen, but years later he still couldn't explain what he'd seen. A thing that looked like a cow from a distance, sat like a dog, had human hands, stood on 2 legs, and could perfectly mimic both animal and human sounds to lure prey. Whatever tricksters were, he'd met one that night on his grandma's mountain property, and he'd never go back. On September 14th, 2020, an anonymous user posted something on 4chan that would make readers think twice about touching anything unfamiliar in the wilderness. He was a self-described rock nerd, and what started as a geology detour on a scout hike nearly killed him in a way nobody could explain. He was 14 at the time, pretty fit from running cross-country, nothing special, but in good shape. His scout group was hiking down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon to spend a few days on the Havasupai Reservation. The group naturally split into fast guys and slow guys. He would normally be with the fast group, but his friend was struggling, so he hung back. This worked out fine for him, because he was a rock nerd, and the slow pace gave him time to stop and look at geological formations along the way. He noticed something that caught his attention. Most of the stone in the canyon sits in clean, horizontal layers, but there was a stripe in the rock face that twisted from horizontal to vertical in a way that looked almost like a graph curve. A little cliff climbing in the narrows to get there, nothing serious. He told his friend to go ahead and that he'd catch up. His friend accepted his geology autism without complaint. As he got closer to the stripe, he realized it was andesite, which made no sense. Igneous rock has no business being in the Grand Canyon. That only made him more curious. He spent about 30 minutes pathfinding his way up to a flat spot to get a better look, working his way up a small cliff face, maybe 15 to 20 feet at most. That's when he saw it, a small flower growing out of a crevice in the rock. He'd never seen anything like it before or since. It had green petals. Being who he was, he poked it. The petals were under tension somehow, and the moment he touched it, the whole thing snapped like a mousetrap, exploding outward and releasing a cloud of pollen directly into his face. What happened next he described as immediate and total, mind-numbing terror. He soiled himself completely, both ways, and didn't even register it. He had no idea why he was so terrified. There was no thought process behind it, no reasoning. It was just pure animal panic that arrived in an instant, with no warning and no explanation. He climbed down to a height where he could safely jump and started running. Not jogging, not moving quickly, sprinting with everything he had toward the rest of the group. The fear operated in a feedback loop. The faster he ran, the more it faded, but the moment he slowed down, it rushed back in like a wave. He felt like he physically could not stop. He knew it was tearing his body apart. His legs were burning, his lungs were shredding, he had foam building up around his mouth, but slowing down was so terrifying that he kept pushing. He blew straight past the slow group when he reached them, moving too fast for anyone to stop him, past their questions and outstretched hands. He hit the fast group the same way. The Scoutmaster, thank God, was a former wrestler and bigger than him. He grabbed the poster as he came through. By his account, he fought like a wild animal, trying to bite, screaming that he had to get away before it arrived. The Scoutmaster got him into a headlock until he passed out. They tied him up and tried to figure out what to do next. There was no cell signal that deep in the canyon. If something went seriously wrong down there, the only option was to send someone to the Havasupai tribe and request a horse or a medevac. The Scoutmaster went down to the tribe himself. It took about an hour, and by the time he got back, the fear had faded completely. The poster had no explanation for what had happened. All he could talk about was the rock stripe and the green flower. When it became clear he wasn't going to bolt again, they untied him, let him wash off in the river, and gave him a change of clothes. The Scoutmaster returned with a horse, but by that point, a medevac wasn't needed. The horse was used just to get him down the canyon because he was completely destroyed. He estimated he had run 6 miles in roughly 30 minutes at full sprint. He could barely stand. He spent the rest of the trip recovering, genuinely uncertain whether he'd be able to walk back out of the canyon under his own power. He was basically crippled for the next 2 days. He asked the tribe about the flower. They had never heard of anything like it. He ended his post with a reflection that hit harder than anything else in the thread. If he hadn't stayed on the trail, and if the Scoutmaster hadn't been strong enough to physically stop him, he believed he would have run himself to death. The fear didn't fade quickly, even when he was being held down. Combined with the distance he'd already covered at full sprint, a few more miles, and his body simply would not have survived it. And then he said something that lingered with every reader who made it to the end. Whenever he heard stories about hikers found 30 miles off course from where they started, at the top of some mountain they had no business being on, he thought about that little green flower and wondered how many people never made it back. The comment section filled with people trying to make sense of it. Some pointed toward known defense mechanisms in plants, species that release chemical compounds capable of triggering panic responses in animals that eat or disturb them. Certain flowers do produce compounds that interact with mammalian nervous systems, but nothing documented causes that level of sustained, overwhelming terror. Nothing makes a person run until they foam at the mouth and can't physically stop. Others brought up accounts from indigenous communities about specific plants in canyon regions that were considered deeply dangerous and left completely alone, though no one could pin down an exact match. What stayed with people most wasn't the running or even the fear itself, it was the detail about arriving. He hadn't just been afraid, he'd been screaming that he had to get away before it arrives. Something was coming. He didn't know what. The flower hadn't shown him anything, hadn't given him a vision or a warning. It had simply filled him with the certainty that something was behind him and closing in, and that if he stopped moving, it would reach him. Whether that was the plant's chemistry manipulating his brain, or something the pollen had briefly allowed him to perceive, nobody in the thread could say. But that single detail, the thing that was arriving, was the part no one could shake, because whatever it was, it never showed up, and that somehow made it worse. On August 31st, 2012, an anonymous user posted something on 4chan that would leave readers questioning what kind of person or thing they had been reading about. He started simply, right after high school he moved to the Midwest. Nothing left for him on the West Coast. Dead-end friends, absent parents, a girl who had stopped caring. So he left, settled down 1,000 miles east of where he was born, and met Nick. Nick was tall, thin, and had eyes that were completely black. He worked at a funeral home, handling dead bodies, picking them up, dropping them off, dressing them, cremating them. The poster knew almost nothing about him, never met his family, never learned anything about his past. Nick lived alone, and as far as anyone could tell, never spent time with anyone except the poster. They met at a Blockbuster. The poster asked about a movie. Nick said it was bad and suggested something better. Simple enough. But after that, every single time the poster walked into that Blockbuster, Nick was there. 8 in the morning, 11 at night, it didn't matter. He was always there, never acknowledging anyone, just browsing. The employees said he wasn't staff, just a customer who watched a lot of movies. Management guessed he'd seen everything in the store at least twice. The poster started paying attention to his picks, foreign films, horror, documentaries. Eventually, he approached him again, asked for a recommendation, then kept pressing until he finally asked if Nick wanted to hang out. Nick said yes. They fell into a routine of dinners and driving around. One night, Nick turned off the main road, wound through an older neighborhood, and kept going until the city disappeared behind them and the forest swallowed everything up. The air changed, not just different, but wrong, like rotting animals piled up somewhere nearby. The poster asked to roll his window up. Nick ignored him. They followed a dirt road past the last streetlights until only darkness remained, and then a single light appeared in the distance, illuminating part of a tall wooden fence. Nick stopped the car, shifted into park, and said nothing. They sat there for 10 or 20 minutes before a figure stepped under the lamp. Short, thin, bipedal. It stood in the light briefly, then dropped to all fours and scurried back into the dark. The poster turned to Nick, who was watching it calmly. He turned his headlights off, so as not to disturb it. "I come here and watch them from time to time," he said. The poster asked what they were. Nick shrugged. Then, the poster turned his head to the side and saw what he described as the last thing he wanted to see, a pair of eyes staring directly at him from about a dozen feet from the car. A small dark face with something like a snout, but features that were distinctly human. He screamed. He admitted it freely. Nick squinted at it, shifted into reverse, and drove them back toward the city. On the way home, he explained that creatures like that had been living on the north side of the city in the woods for a long time. He discovered them while driving around and had been observing them ever since. He asked the poster if he'd come out there with him sometimes to check on them. The poster agreed, not entirely sure he had a choice. The poster had been doing his own research on creepy places in the area and found mention of something called the Purple Church, an old urban legend about a congregation that had been corrupted by its pastors in the late 1980s. They'd flipped completely from worship to sacrifice, and the place had been shut down and condemned. But people kept using it. The crime got bad enough that police eventually roped it off and burned it to the ground. When he told Nick about it, Nick simply nodded. He clearly already knew about it. He said they'd go at night because during the day it was boring. They drove out past the creature lamp and the fence and deeper into the actual forest. Abandoned houses lined the route, and if the poster's eyes weren't failing him, small piles of ruined vehicles sat out among the trees. Nick cut the headlights and parked behind some bushes. Too loud, he said. They continued on foot. Truck engines roared somewhere in the distance throughout the woods, and the poster assumed it was off-roaders. He was wrong. They came across a bathtub sitting in the middle of the woods. He thought nothing of it until the smell reached him, and he shined his flashlight over. Dozens of dead animals inside, fresh ones and bones. He gagged and hit the switch to kill the light, but it was too late. Someone in the trees had already seen the beam. "Hey," a voice from the forest. They ran. The poster ran, and when he turned around, Nick was gone. No sign of him in any direction, just gone. A truck, with no headlights, roared out of the darkness, with 6 men loaded in the back, a spotlight, and weapons. He dove into a pile of brush and logs, and pressed himself flat, invisible in the dark. The men climbed off the truck and began moving through the trees with machetes and hatchets. They were getting closer. Then the spotlight shattered. Complete darkness. The men called out to each other, confused, asking for the light to be restored. Silence from the truck. Something else was in the woods. Then one man screamed to his right. Then another, and another, one by one, each sound erupting and then cutting off. The men were being thrown into trees, slammed into trunks, and beaten down by a tall, thin figure moving through the dark. Then a hand covered the poster's mouth from behind. He struggled before realizing it was Nick. They moved silently back through the trees to the car and drove home. Nick dropped him off without saying a word. They started spending more time at Nick's place when the poster's apartment became too chaotic. It was a plain 2-bedroom house, nothing remarkable about it. They watched movies, ate pizza, spent normal nights in. Then one night, the bedroom door exploded open, closed and latched one moment, then slamming against the wall like it had been kicked hard from the inside. Nick glanced at it for a second and went back to watching the movie. He said yes when asked if that was normal. The poster slept on the couch that night. From the moment they went to bed until sunrise, he heard footsteps moving from room to room throughout the house. Nick never left his bedroom. When he asked about it, Nick said he didn't know its name, not what it was. Its name, when pressed further, he just shrugged. That shrug, the poster wrote, used to drive him insane. Another night, they were on the back porch smoking cigars when the house lights went out. The footsteps started again inside. The poster turned and looked through the glass. The fish tank light and a clock gave just enough glow to make out a shadow figure moving from room to room, darting through the hallway and kitchen. He called out to Nick, who looked in. The figure snapped around to face them, stood still for a moment, then disappeared deeper into the house. Nick put down his cigar, went inside, and told the poster to wait outside. The poster watched the curtained bedroom window. After a while, a flash of white light came from behind it. Not a light bulb, white light. Then the house lights came back on, and Nick walked out and picked up his cigar like nothing had happened. One night they got drunk together, and Nick changed. Less stoic, more open. He spoke with an accent the poster had never heard before, something between Italian and French. He smiled, actually smiled, and seemed to be enjoying himself. He took the poster into his room and showed him what he kept there. A knife under the pillow, another by the windowsill, a third hidden inside a book. Maps and leather-bound tomes covering things the poster couldn't fully understand, some written in languages he didn't recognize. Books on hunting, but not any mammal he knew of. A bear trap in the closet, a compact shotgun tucked in the corner, and a small pile of wooden stakes. He described it less as a bedroom and more as an armory. He took a photo of Nick that night when he thought Nick was looking away. When he checked it later, Nick was facing the camera directly. One evening, Nick brought the poster to his place of work after hours. They met in the parking lot, but the building was locked, and Nick was nowhere to be found. The poster wandered the property until he spotted Nick at the tree line, standing at the edge of the small cemetery attached to the building. He followed and found him lying in an open grave, hands behind his head, staring up at the stars. They made small talk for a while before Nick asked him directly, "Do you trust me?" The poster nodded. He asked the same back. "I do," Nick said. Then he pulled himself out of the grave and led them to the building's front door, which opened without a key. Inside, past the lobby and through the main hall, Nick brought him to the dressing room. Walls of drawers for body storage, surgical tables, sewing equipment, makeup, racks of clothing for the deceased, and at the end of the room, a tall door. The poster didn't describe what was behind it. They eventually went urban exploring at an old abandoned building called St. Vincent's. The place had been a home for boys and had a dark history of murders and a presence documented in internal records as something that had been there for years, turning things progressively worse. Fixating on one male nurse in particular who spoke about it constantly. They went through the building twice. On the first visit, they found an old fireproof safe buried behind rubble and a freshly inflated yellow balloon tied to a chair in an otherwise completely destroyed room. On the second visit, they found a key hidden at the bottom of a locked drawer in the same desk they had once hidden behind. They opened the safe upstairs. Inside were old folders and papers documenting the murders at the home in detail, written accounts of a presence that had made itself known over years, files on every person involved, journal entries, predictions. Someone had known what was happening there and done nothing. On the first visit, before they found the key, something else found them. The building had been quiet, and then footsteps started overhead, light at first, barely audible, then heavy and aggressive, stomping and knocking things over. A shadow passed over the staircase, and the thing came downstairs, moving through the ground floor, before entering the room where they were hiding behind the desk. The smell of charred flesh and vomit filled the space. Then it spoke, deep, grumbling, like its throat was full of fluid. "There is no need to hide, Santos. Never return here." Then it left. On the drive home, the poster finally pushed hard enough that Nick gave him something. He said it was a demon, something bound to the building, that the place was evil and he could taste the malice in it. Then the poster asked who Santos was. Nick told him it was his last name. The demon had known who he was, which wasn't good. One commenter asked the question sitting under the surface of every post. Had the poster ever considered the consequences of all of this? Demons that knew Nick's name, satanic cults in the forest, possessed people in urban alleyways. What did he think was going to happen eventually? Another asked why the poster seemed to think he was going to die soon, and what was the order. The poster never gave a complete answer to either question, and that silence said more than any explanation could have. What made this thread unlike anything else on the board wasn't the creatures, or the cult, or the demon that spoke Nick's name. It was Nick himself. Every detail pointed somewhere that couldn't be explained. Eyes completely black, a job surrounded by the dead, always in the blockbuster no matter what time you arrived, never acknowledging anyone. A house where something walked room to room at night and he refused to give it a name. An armory hidden in his bedroom, stocked with things designed to hunt animals that don't exist in any field guide. A funeral home that opened for him without a key. And then the photo, taken when he was supposedly looking away, showing him staring directly into the lens. The poster said at one point that the creatures under the street lamp were actually the least interesting thing about his time with Nick. That ghosts, a demon, a cult, and possessed homeless people were all just incidents that happened alongside him, and readers believed it because nothing about Nick himself had ever been explained. Where he was from, he said, depended or he didn't remember. He had a last name a demon in an abandoned building recognized. He had tattoos and script covering both arms that he kept hidden under long sleeves. And after everything that happened, after cults and flashlights smashing in the dark, and men being thrown into trees by something the poster never quite saw clearly, Nick would just drive them home, put a cassette in, and say nothing. The two comments at the end, about consequences and about something called the Order, never got direct answers in the thread, but the poster's phrasing suggested he already knew what was coming, and that he'd made his peace with it by the time he was typing. He'd moved to the Midwest to escape a life that was going nowhere. What he found instead was something that had been going somewhere for a very long time, and had simply waited at a Blockbuster until he walked through the door. On April 21st, 2013, an anonymous user posted something on 4chan that would make readers afraid of the forests behind their houses. He started by saying he'd never believed in any of this stuff until he started reading these stories and suddenly made some connections. He swore to God this was all true. He lived in Pennsylvania, just outside the city of Reading. There were a lot of thick forests around there, but nothing ridiculous. Mostly suburbs where he was. Farther out, it was highways and farmland. Lucky for him, he lived right up at the edge of a small community at the very top of a hill. The forest was literally across the street from him. Somewhere around a year or two ago, him and his dad were outside having a personal chat about some recent tough events going on in the house, when suddenly they heard a weird sound in the forest across the road. They both stopped and looked over. "I didn't think deer came out this late," he said. His dad just stared and looked kind of confused. Then suddenly they heard someone yell something like, "Help, I'm bleeding." His dad stood up and said to get inside. They both rushed in, and he watched his dad run upstairs to grab his handgun. His dad was a rough sort of guy, and always headed for his gun if he thought something was going down. Something was definitely going down. He opened their back door to the deck, a glass door, and peeked back out towards the forest to see if anyone would come sprinting out or something. Keep in mind, they were at the edge of the suburbs, and not exactly used to hearing people scream bloody murder in the middle of the night. Then he heard it. This loud, weird screech. It was like a cat or a woman, but it definitely wasn't human. It was weird, like it was high-pitched, but not, and filled the entire neighborhood for a full 10 seconds before it suddenly went silent. He slammed the glass door shut and ran to the stairs just in time to see his dad stomping down in boots with his pistol. "Did you hear that?" he asked. His dad just nodded, and they both headed out the front. By now a bunch of their neighbors were coming outside too. The scream was really loud, but he didn't even expect all these people to come out this late. It was almost midnight. His dad went down to the street and looked up at the forest. Another guy came up to his dad, and he had some kind of handgun too. He watched them start chatting for a bit, until suddenly, another one of those screams pierced the air again. It was horrible and made him feel sick to his stomach. It went on for something like another 10 seconds, and just suddenly cut off. Like idiots, his dad and this random neighbor guy decided to point their guns towards the forest and head in. He couldn't believe it. His dad was a hunter and had been doing it since he was a kid. He was almost 40, but he'd be damned if he'd do something like that. They must have been in the forest for a good 20 minutes together, searching the darkness for God knows what. He sat outside with a bunch of neighbors that entire time, staring into the forest and waiting. Eventually, they came back just fine. They stuck together the entire time, according to his dad, and thought they saw something like a tall guy in the forest at some point. When they tried to see if he was the one screaming, apparently he got on all fours and hauled ass into the forest. They all were pretty shaken up, but parted ways and headed back to their houses. That was pretty weird, and no police or anything ever checked it out, but eventually they all moved past it. Later that year, he was sitting outside with his friend on his back porch. They were talking and having a good time when he saw his cat Jinx pawing at his glass window. "What a stupid cat," his friend said. He agreed with him and played with the cat, putting his finger on the window while the cat pawed at his finger wherever it went. That's not what was weird though. Later that night, he was in his room playing a game with his window open. His cat was somewhere in the house along with all their dogs, so he knew he was fine. It was important to note that his neighborhood had a real problem with stray cats though. He was sitting there playing some games with his window open when he heard what sounded like a cat meowing outside. He paused his game, wondering if Jinx had gotten outside, and went to his window to listen. He heard that meow again, but it was a long, deep one, the kind you hear from a cat when they're pissed and backed in a corner with their claws out. He recognized it wasn't his cat, but it was still coming from the woods behind his house, so he stared into them and tried to see where the stray was. and what it was getting so pissed at. The cat did that deep, long, angry meow again, and it sounded sort of close to his actual yard. He heard some shuffling in the woods, and then something weird happened. He thought he could hear someone talking, except it wasn't like a normal person's voice. It was like some mentally unstable person trying to mimic someone else really badly. It was something like, "Sht, ooh, podcar." Immediately he got creeped out, but seeing as how his window was on the second floor, he felt fairly safe to keep listening. Then he realized the voice was changing. "Sht, you peep it, see it at." It clicked. It sounded like something trying to sound like his friend, but doing really, really badly. Then there was a serious scuffle. He heard twigs breaking and the cat just going crazy. It was really screeching and meowing like it was fighting for life or death. Then there was this loud thumping sound. It was like something big and heavy smacking against something else solid. After that, the meowing stopped completely, and whatever was out there went dead silent. He was pretty creeped out by this point and shut his window and had real trouble sleeping that night. Nothing really happened since, aside from one incident where he was getting a drink late one night and thought he saw someone crouching really super low on his back porch and looking into his glass door, like he saw a light reflect off their eyes like when you see an animal at night or something. The door was locked, and it really freaked him out and made him sprint to his room and wake up his dad, but his dad didn't find anyone or anything. He'd been assuming it was just him being scared from all these stories on the paranormal board. Now that he'd read all these stories, he was freaking out. He'd never seen one about something even remotely close to these things happening around his area, but now he was terrified. That thing was literally in his backyard.